weather. It's like an Indian summer still, so we're still getting sort of 28 degrees, blue sky. The only time we get a bit of mist in the sky is when they do what they call a controlled burn off on the bush, which frequently gets out of control.
The controlled burns. Last time you were on, you were mentioning about a lawsuit, and it was all very secretive and had to be kept hidden for various reasons, including the most important one was your safety. Can you give us an update on where that went and what the details were of that?
Yes, I certainly can. I think for people that haven't heard me before, I better give a quick intro as to my background. I joined the military at the tender age of 15 in the Royal Navy in England, and that progressed through to being a basic radio operator, and then getting involved in, as part of the job, codes and ciphers. I used a machine which a lot of people in the know would know about, which is an American KL7 decoder, which to this day is one of the few machines that they can't tap into. And despite the fact it's now an antiquated machine, when I think of all the hacking and everything that's going on today, I think they should bring it back into norm again. Anyway, that was part of my job as well as reconnaissance. So the Cold War was in full swing, so I joined the Navy as a boy entrant. My first ship was a carrier, and before the age of 18 I'd been all around the world, and also been in quite a few conflict areas, Middle East, Far East, the jungles of Borneo. And because of the nature of my work, I was frequently put in with the landing parties, with the Marines, because we always carried Marines on board. So if they did a landing, I would be like a liaison with them, like directing fire onto target, relaying information backwards and forwards, codes and ciphers, obviously. And what was interesting was you get an order from command, and you decode it. It comes out on a little ticker tape. Then you have to edit it into basic plain language, because sometimes the coding isn't all that clear. And then with that order or instruction, you then go to the captain of the vessel or the commander if you're in NATO, whatever, and you say from the commander-in-chief, turn to starboard, 10 degrees or whatever. So it's like you're almost in command of the ship. All you're doing is passing an order to a captain who's accepting what you're telling him to carry out the order. So that's the crux of it all. And on top of that, I then moved around onto other more important jobs. I eventually ended up onto a tank landing craft, which became a submarine base at Portland in Dorset, and I joined the staff of senior officer submarines, and also participated in some of their training, and frequently went out in a little boat that couldn't stand any waves of any size, to recover torpedoes, dummy torpedoes and things like that. That was quite exciting, but also made you very sick. And then I moved on to Flag Officer Sea Training, which is when vessels are being launched or decommissioned and commissioned again after an overhaul, and the crews are all new. You send the ship and the crews to Flag Officer Sea Training to bring them up to war standards. So I was on the staff of Flag Officer Sea Training, and then, I wanted to be at sea and go around the world, but then when you get stuck on a staff job, you never get away from it. So from that, I then went and became a team of NATO at the NATO headquarters, CNC Eastland, and lived in an underground bunker, almost a town, self-contained, sleeping, food, you name it, everything you wanted. You'd go through massive airlock doors. I think there was 4 of them from memory. And once you're in there, that's it. It's atomic bomb proof and everything else. you never see the light of day, and you carry on doing what you're doing, codes and ciphers, passing the messages on, and then the commanding officer sits in a little glass bubble overlooking a massive plot board of the whole of Europe, because the Cold War was on, showing Russia and all the Baltic states, where their missile sites were, etc., etc. And it's like a game of chess, Tom.
Yeah.
you know, a message comes in saying that, you're getting coded messages from real live sort of 007s, James Bond type characters, male and female, and from forces and units and special forces. You decode it, and then you then relate what you've decoded, then goes onto the movement board, the big plotting board. So imagine a big cherry picker, mechanized cherry picker, and a little dolly bird on the end, moving a missile site. The Russians just moved one onto the Polish border, whatever, or the Lithuanian border. And then the commander-in-chief in his best English would say, okay, chaps, well, we better do a countermeasure here, and we'll move our missile site to here to, you know, match the other. So it's like a game of pawns, and quite interesting. Anyway, so I was in that, and then I got onto smaller vessels. I did anti-gun running patrols on a frigate in the Persian Gulf, which also involved the slave trade. So there was Arab dhows coming up from wherever would sell them arms with a cargo of dates, say, incredibly hot, dirty conditions, because Arab dhows are not the best things to be on. No. And then we'd go aboard and search the cargo. And so you're standing on top, below deck, in very humid, hot, sticky conditions, probing the bags with a spike to see if there's any landmines or whatever, which isn't a good thing to do. No. And then hopefully you find some contraband, which we did. You arrest the vessel, confiscate it, blah, blah, blah. On top of that, we also have the humanitarian side, where we would intercept a dhow that was coming up from Africa with human people on board, women and children that were being taken to the Middle East as slaves, or to be somebody else's future wife, you know, girl brides, whatever. And the sad side of that is, many times when we got onto them, because we weren't an incredibly fast ship, you know, your visibility from the top deck is about 20 miles. By the time you get there, and they're turning away from you, they've chucked their cargo over the side, lead weighted or whatever, and the evidence isn't there anymore. So they're basically throwing women and children into the sea, and we never ever caught that side of the gun running or human trafficking side. And then, of course, on top of that, we've got the ongoing Middle East wars, which I was part of. And then, of course, because I was search and rescue and frequently had to go into a lifeboat, I got into some pretty nasty situations where two oil tankers fully loaded collided, and we're picking up victims out of the burning sea and all that sort of thing. So it's pretty gut-wrenching. And then on other times, of course, because I was on a carrier, we're doing operational sorties, bombing the alleged terrorists in the Jabal Mountains at the back of Muscat or wherever. I was also in Aden, and we lost a few crews. It was all futile wars as normal. And then eventually I ended up in the jungles of Borneo doing patrols with the Marines in the jungle, or following what they call pirates that do raids. They come off the islands of southern Philippines and raid the Borneo villages. They take all their logs behind a little tugboat to the Philippines. They get paid, and on the way back they get intercepted by the pirates, which I guess you could call terrorists, but they're really not. They're just people that like money. And they shoot up the boat, take the money, and then they have the audacity to sail into the village where the boat came from and then shoot the village up. So we used to work in with the local police and go to those camps, and some of those were quite genuine and scary, but a lot of them were very hilarious. So I won't go into that anymore. So that's basically the background, and then I left the military and became an executive. Well, first of all, I went into the building trade as a fill-in from operational duties in the military, and then started in the airline business and graded up from a transport driver to a senior operational executive of a major airline in the UK, long haul and short haul, and then went through various companies. That took me worldwide as well. I then joined a helicopter company, one of the biggest in the world, working in the oil, gas and mining sectors, delivering personnel and equipment to oil rigs. I ran a very large search and rescue unit, and I became a search and rescue coordinator or disaster coordinator. I then picked up on my marine side and sat my master's ticket, so legally you could refer to me as a captain, but it's a load of bullshit, so don't bother. And then I sat my radar ticket, so I did radar and all that sort of thing, search and rescue, pretty good run of the mill, and eventually I ended up as running as general manager of a private jet facility in England, looking after the VIPs of the world with their private jets, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the royal family and very senior military. And that was round about the time of 9/11. And I remember distinctly when 9/11 happened, which we know was a false flag. Yeah. I was watching it live on TV with a fellow American who worked at our facility. And we both cried together. We both believed what we saw. And I got a call because Princess Anne was coming through on the Royal helicopter, and she'd cancelled her itinerary because of the high risk. And the intel people and the police spoke to me and said, look, there's not an issue. We can shut down the, people. The Americans call it lockdown, which is a bit of an overkill. We can shut down the airport, make it very secure so that Princess Anne can land here. There will be an armed guard on the tarmac and myself only. There will be no physical door onto the tarmac. No other aircraft will be allowed to land or take off. So put her at ease. And eventually she put her tour back on and came through the facility twice. So that's pretty well my background. Oil, gas, high-level security, both in that facility and also in the oil and gas and mining industry. So pretty well mixed run of the mill. The more you've got under the belt, the better.
Yes.
And then when I finished my career, I started to get involved. I thought, well, I should put this knowledge to good use. So I got involved in journalism, and I became the major columnist for the Palestine Telegraph, which is nothing special, but their audience was quite low, so they wanted to boost it up, and boy did I boost it up, because I shoot straight from the hip. I'll say to your audience now, and anybody else that's listening, that what I talk about can be authenticated with forensic evidence. So whatever I say, you put me on a podium, you can cross-examine me, you can ridicule me, you can fire questions at me. I don't even know what the topic is. Yeah. And I will address it to the best of my ability. It will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But at the same time, if you wish to ridicule me, which the New World Order tend to do, yes, then give me the same privilege by putting yourself on the stage, be you a leader, Prime Minister, or MP, whatever, and allow me to cross-examine you live in front of a large audience. Of course, it's not going to happen.
No.
So I started writing a series of articles. I was covering everything from missing nuclear weapons to weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological warfare weapons, who had given what to whom to enhance a war. It was all hypocritical bullshit, etc., etc. And eventually I started touching on massive international fraud and corruption, going to the highest level of politics, up to leader level, president, prime ministers, whatever. And technically, I suppose you could say categorically that the information that myself and my associate, Gordon Bowden, had under our belt was enough to put 3 British Prime Minister is in prison for life. So obviously the case that eventually came out of it was I started naming and shaming all the members of the House of Lords, the Prime Minister, both Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and then David Cameron, who's the biggest shyster of all, including the current PM, yes. And started to expose that massive fraud. And at some stage, I was befriended by a female intel officer. She claimed she was an intel advisor to the British government, whichever party was in, it didn't matter. She had direct access to number 10 Downing Street, allegedly, and her name was Tara or Andrea Davison. You can pull that up on the internet, you'll see quite a lot. You can pull up Peter Eyre or Gordon Bowden, or you can pull up my blog, which is still there, but I don't do anything with it now because I've got enough on my plate without getting tied up in blogs. But Eyre International, WordPress blog site, has got probably 350 articles, pretty hardline hitting, and again can be proven if challenged. But I tend not to respond to sarcastic emails or the people that troll the sites to humiliate you. My policy is challenge me. I should not have to prove what I'm saying is correct. If you challenge me, you prove that I'm incorrect.
Yes.
And then put me on the podium and cross-examine me, but allow me the same privilege. So, for instance, when I used to do conferences or when I went to some gathering in London, there would be, the current shadow Prime Minister, I've forgotten his name, the English one that's against the current thing, I've forgotten it. Corbyn, that's it. It was a bit of a humanist, but it's got a dark side as well. Yes. He was on the podium. Some lady, politician, like Baroness, whatever her name was on there. A couple of other politicians, a few activists and myself. And I was probably the sixth one to fire up. So you know what it's like listening to politicians. You're bored shitless and you're nodding off on your seat. And I looked across at the audience and thought, oh my God, they look absolutely cheesed off. And I've still got to speak yet. They'll all be asleep by the time I get up. And I remember Corbyn, on this particular occasion, a woman stood up with a foreign accent. She asked a very, very delicate question regarding wars and human rights. And he immediately put her down and said, I'm sorry, ma'am, but, this isn't the topic of this meeting. And he refused to answer her. And he made her sit down. She was somewhat embarrassed. And then it came to my time, and I thought, shit, I've got to try and liven this audience up. They're all, half are going to leave soon, and the other half's got to be woken up. So I've got to get them sitting on the edge of their seats. So I did my presentation, which happened to be on Gaza at the time. And I said, I'm going to give you a presentation here that's going to blow you away. I will warn you that it will probably also be very emotional. And I'm sure a lot of the women in the audience will probably prefer to turn away from what you're about to see on the big screen. But it's all fact. The pictures are authentic from different areas, all to do with Gaza and Lebanon and Israel, of course, at the time. And we had a group of Israelis there, the traditional Jewish, genuine people. And I just said, Assalamu alaikum, the traditional welcome to the Muslim people. And then I said, Shalom to the Israeli group. And then I started. But before I started, I asked the lady to stand up that had asked the question to Corbyn. And I said, ma'am, if you'd like to ask that question of me, it is valid, and I will answer it. And of course, Corbyn was really getting cheesed off with me. So she stood up, answered, etc. And then, I got a good clap. I felt good. I felt very relaxed. I sat down, and all of a sudden, all the media in the room came in front of me and the podium, firing questions at me. I said, excuse me, there's still two more guest speakers, to go. Leave it till after the show.
Yeah.
Anyway, I still got to drive north because I was living in the North Midlands at the time. I still got like a 4-hour drive to do. And they just held me up and I was saturated. I felt so good because for the first time, the normal controlled media, the Zionist controlled media, we had like Press TV, Russia Today, China TV, all those channels. This is real propaganda for them. So I was inundated, and that's how my career extended on media. I became an investigative journalist with authentic evidence. I did numerous interviews. In fact, there wasn't enough hours in the day. I'd hit the pillow at night and the phone would go and it's Press TV, we're live on air. Things like that. Or you're driving down the motorway to do a documentary with IRIB, which is an Iranian-spoken channel. And I'm driving down, again in heavy traffic, 3-hour, 4-hour trip. And on the way down, I get a call from another channel saying, can we go live on air? I said, excuse me, I'm driving on the M1, heading south for an interview, a documentary in London. Oh, can you call in at the studios? And I said, no, I can't. He says, we'll give you £200. I said, no. Money's not everything. I'm doing this one job and that's it. So you can understand the pressure that came on me. On top of that, I'm dealing with 2 English-speaking European stations in Spain that beam all the way around Europe. Talk Radio Europe was one of them. And I was getting these special slots, and I was doing what you're doing, and eventually I got my own show. But every time I was cut down because I speak the truth. They cancelled it, or they would attack my Skype or whatever. So life was pretty tense. I won't say I got direct threats, but when I started delving into the area of pedophilia, especially with the Holly Gregg case that came up, then I did, I think, 14 articles on that. And I got a coded message from the compere of one of the shows, Talk Radio Europe. I can't remember the name, an English guy. And he says, I'm going to ask you to do something. I can't discuss it on air because the radio station will close me down. But I'll just give you a name, and your own intelligence, if you look into it, will tell you what I want you to do. And he gave the name Holly Gregg. So I looked into it and I thought, wow, this is big. And so I wrote the 14. I was the only journalist at the time that covered pedophilia on this scale, naming and shaming the Prime Minister, calling ex-Prime Minister Gordon Brown a pedophile, calling Tony Blair partial pedophilia in his younger days, and also the fact that he was complicit in allowing it to run rife through the political scene of England. And then, of course, David Cameron, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what more can I tell you? There's so many...
To touch on that, because there was a famous incident in Dunblane that was a cover-up for pedophilia, which involved Gordon Brown and a number of other Scottish MPs.
Yeah. I covered that. I know that inside out.
That's where the tennis player came from, wasn't he?
Well, the thing is, the guy that shot the children was a pedophile.
Yeah.
And technically, at that stage, he couldn't get a gun license. He was given a gun license by Gordon Brown. And on top of that, of course, the Ollie Gregg story, which is, I'll touch that briefly. There's so many topics we could cover, Tom. I don't know how many hours in the day. Yeah. Remember, I've been doing this sort of work for 15, 20 years.
You covered a lot of topics.
Yeah. It wasn't the topic I chose to go down. I started off with the futility of wars and illegal arms dealings and all the secret squirrel work in the military. And then extended into massive fraud and corruption and pedophilia. Yeah. I can tell you now, the most dangerous aspect of life is being critical of pedophilia.
Yeah.
If you want to put your life on the line, start exposing pedophilia, because it is so rife and it's so much part of the New World Order, Illuminati, Jesuit, whatever you want to call it, that you're taking on some of the most powerful people in the world, commercially and politically.
Yeah.
And so, in regards to Dunblane, that tied in also with the Holly Gregg story, and I tell you, I've got some really nice threats from that organisation, especially group threats, not singular. But we're coming to get you. Okay, well, bring it on. Basically, I'll tell you how it interfolds with the Dunblane massacre, because Holly Gregg was a Down syndrome girl. She was raped by her father as a young child, because I don't know whether you know the procedure, but the more disabilities you have, if you're deaf, dumb, blind, no arms, no legs, and the pedophiles can rape you, they get more brownie points, if that makes sense. Despite how sordid it sounds, it's fact. Yeah. And so a girl that, I don't know whether you know about Down syndrome children, but they're very trustworthy. Yes. They're very sincere. They don't tell porky pies or lies. And also, besides being very trustworthy, they're very loving. So if someone befriends them, they don't think for 1 minute that that person can harm them. So the dad harmed her, and then the dad did the same with the son. The son then became a sort of a junior pedophile, so both of them were working on Holly. And then when they'd finished with her, they handed her over to a greater paedophilia circle in Aberdeen in Scotland. Now, I named and shamed the people involved, and the highest judge in Aberdeen was part of it, of the circle. Senior police, senior fire brigade, there's social services that were there to protect her were part of it, etc., etc. And the legal people in Scotland and of course, the Minister for Scotland, all aware or involved in it. And that paedophilia, people started, after Holly Gregg, other people started opening up about little children and the parents, allowing them to open up about what was going on. Now you can relate to Dunblane because the children in Dunblane school happened to be living or working. The school was opposite one of the ministers involved in this case with Holly Gregg. Yep. How very convenient. And so there was a fear that these children would start exposing what was happening to them. And so it was organised for this other young paedophile to be armed and go in and allegedly shoot the children and a couple of the teachers, and then himself. In actual fact, he didn't shoot himself, because if you shoot yourself, you've got no guarantee you're going to take yourself out. But he was taken out by other sources because forensic evidence revealed that. On top of all that, Holly Gregg's mum was threatened. She actually left Scotland because she was frightened, and she was having people shoot through the windows of the house. I think it was near Stafford or somewhere, I can't remember. And then they started to ridicule her. And the crux of the story is that when she reported it to the police, they separated Holly from the mum for obvious reasons, took her in, and then doped her. Yep. And when she came out, Holly's mum said, what's wrong? And she said, she was talking all heebie-jeebie. And so she reported that again, and then eventually she moved to England, and then the men in the white coats came round saying that she was an unworthy mother, and they tried to jab her. Yeah. So anyway, that's basically it. So yes, I'm very much aware. It's all part and parcel. And before changing the topic, we'll now come back onto my court case. I can't give you the number at the moment because I haven't got it in front of me, but if you Google it in, I'm sure you'll find something there. You Google Peter Eyre or Gordon Bowden, Royal Courts of Justice in London, or should I say the Royal Courts of Injustice, This is the highest court in the world, my friends. Please understand that. And you've got a simple man like myself, just a dedicated serviceman and sincere citizen, with Gordon, who was also a sincere military man, cleared up to secret, the same myself, dealing with nuclear weapons, blah, 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 and missiles with the Royal Air Force, and an engineer. And suddenly we're taken to court for defamation by a female spy that we'd befriended, who tried to get us to go to North Wales to meet with her and a couple of my whistleblowers. And then, confidentially, I said to Gordon, we shouldn't do this. You know, we're leaving ourselves wide open for getting knocked off before the, you know, it's like the horse before the cart. Yeah. Don't tell anybody anything until you've initiated an action. So what we did was we cancelled the meeting, and then she took us to court for defamation. But what we realised then was that behind this female spy, Andrea Davidson, was the British government.
Yep. And
it didn't matter which party, because I'm sure you guys know in America, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the cabal put every candidate in office. So they're representative of the New World Order, favouring Israeli policy, which is an essential thing in getting your funds for your promotion into being the president. That all comes from the New World Order.
Absolutely. It's like Trump was involved, or is involved, and funded by AIPAC.
Yeah, that's right. And they do have to swear allegiance. Now, that very exercise of being funded to millions of dollars for your campaign, and also favouring them in your policy once you're in office, along with half of Congress or the British government, whatever, that in itself is an act of treason.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. You don't have to be into rocket science to understand that. And so I've just arrived for a holiday from the UK in England for a Christmas holiday, and my first email on arrival was, Peter, we've been taken to court for defamation. And I thought, Happy Christmas. Anyway, as you would, you know, I'm sorry for swearing, but you shit a brick at first because you know what you're up against. Yes. And you think, how am I going to get through this? You know, with a very high-profile case. Let's put it this way, Thomas. If this case was ever allowed to go public, imagine the best James Bond movie you've ever seen, and put into that not just the espionage, but the illegal arms dealing, the illegal purchase of nuclear weapons, and then by gross neglect allowing them to be stolen and sold on the black market, and the spin-off from all that bastardry that the government does, both America, well, the whole of, you know, the West, basically, the Allies, have instigated a war. So, and then on top of that, imagine, what can we say, fraud and corruption amounting to, quote, trillions of dollars in every country, by siphoning out the system into offshore bank accounts like Panama, Bahamas, the Channel Islands, wherever, doesn't matter. And then add to that the, what can we say, the asset stripping of major conglomerates, both banks and corporations, asset stripping them to make them a useless pile of shit, and then selling that company for peanuts, $1 or £1, to an overseas company that's already well established, immediately giving them access into the UK. Like, for instance, Abbey National was a bank in every city, 2 or 3 branches in every city in England and major town, was intentionally collapsed by the New World Order, and then allowing Santander, the Illuminati Bank of Spain, to immediately infiltrate into England and take over very well-established network and just take the name off the door and put theirs on. And then those crooked directors, who were also in bed with the politicians, House of Lords, Prime Minister, whatever, are then allowed to jump ship when it collapses, get a massive payout on retirement, and then take over, say, the Royal Bank of Scotland in this case, and bankrupt that one.
Yep. And then get the public to pay for it.
Yeah, well, before that, when the Royal Bank of Scotland was collapsed, there was a drawdown of the public monies to prop it up. But people don't understand that money didn't go in the bank to prop it up. As soon as it goes into the bank, it's siphoned out into offshore banks again.
The mirror accounts.
And this is where your wonderful country, or not so wonderful country, comes into it, because your national debt at the time, that they lied through the teeth, but I can tell you, and this is a long time ago, was at least 16 trillion. Minimum.
Yeah.
Right? It's well over that now. Your country is totally bankrupt, no matter what they tell you. And so then think of that money. We'll call it 15 trillion. Then imagine your president at the time allowing 15 trillion, which is equal to national debt, being siphoned out the system via the HSBC Bank in London and then handed over to the Royal Bank of Scotland with no paperwork. And where is it? Who knows?
Yeah, there was 3 lots of 5 trillion, wasn't it?
Correct. Yes.
This was in 2008 when everything else was crashing.
Absolutely. Now, we're coming back. I don't know where to start it. We've covered how many topics? We'll cover about maybe the world financial collapse.
Yeah.
New World Order, Illuminati, Jesuits, whatever you want to call them, which are all interlinked with Israel, and the Zionist Jews. I've got to be careful here because this is not anti-Semitic.
No.
There is a difference between the authentic Jews that lived in the Holy Land way back, that got on very well with all the mixed religions and nationalities, than the what I call the mongrel Jews. Yeah, that came from the Khazayan Jews, which was around the Caspian Sea area to the west and northwest of there. In medieval times or after that, a country or this area was given an opportunity. You either go Catholic or you go Jewish. So remember, they're not born into this. They're not natural Jews. They're not natural Catholics or whatever. They had to decide which faith they wanted to survive. And at the time, the only way to go was to become Jewish. So these are the Khazayan Jews, or whatever you want to call them. I call them the mongrel Jews, who then infiltrated into the whole of Europe and spread like cancer. Right? Those Jews, those particular Zionist Jews, have got people that also work for them that are Christians, and they're called Zionist Christians, who believe that every Jew should be allowed to repatriate to the Holy Land, which they say belongs to them as per the Torah and, the biblical terms, everything belongs to them. Now, we know that strip of what they call Israel, which in actual fact is Palestine, is not big enough to take the world's population of Jews. It could take the authentic Jews, but it certainly couldn't take these man-made Jews, what I call the Zionist mafia, Illuminati, whatever. And so if they repatriate it, then we're looking at it from the Christian perspective, if they repatriate the Jews back into the Holy Land and they become in situ, then Jesus will return and they will convert the Jews to the Christian faith. You know, I know, that can never happen. Yes. A Jew will never surrender his religion. And the other thing is, a lot of people don't understand this because there's lots of powerful people out there who are Jews but won't disclose it. And what's the media giant? The Australian one. Rupert Murdoch?
Murdoch, yeah.
It's a Jew. Now, he's denounced that. But I've got a picture of his mum being seen regularly by the chief rabbi in her hometown. Now, the law of Judaism is if your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish.
Yeah.
Not the father, the mum. Because you come from your mum, right, physically. And so Rupert Murdoch is a typical Zionist Jew. He's not an authentic Jew, etc., etc. Now, when I met a high-profile delegation of the natural Jews, the ones that got to the Wailing Wall, etc., with the curls and the black and everything, I met them in London, and you can even see this on the media. There's some of the very senior rabbis of saying that under their eyes, they have no right to own their own country. They're a faith, like any other faith that can live in peace in whatever country.
Yeah.
It was never intended for them, the genuine guys, to have the Holy Land as per this fanatical thing now. So you've got two dangerous groups here. You've got the Jewish Zionists and the Christian Zionists helping each other, and eventually, if you get them all back, the Christians believe they're going to convert. You know it's going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah.
Taking all that to one side, that bad seed or that cancerous growth has now taken over the political scene in every country.
And the banks.
Through the banks. Well, they control the banks anyway.
Yeah.
Now, where I'm coming from is when I stepped out of that expose on nuclear weapons and all those nasty things that went on, and we got into the nitty-gritty of how the New World Order is funded. And this is a learning curve for everybody. I'm sure it may be for you as well. That I'll give you an example, and it's everywhere. You, myself, a couple of listeners, decide we want to create an oil company or a mining company. So we look for a derelict mine site that maybe existed during Queen Victoria days that is now completely void of natural resources. We pick it up for peanuts, so it's not going to cost us anything. We then put a fence around it. We then put a shed in there, and we dig a spade hole and put a couple of armed guards with AK-47s and call it an open pit mine site. Or we buy a permit area offshore in the most remote area we can possibly think of, because we then know that nobody's going to check it out. So, for instance, the Falkland Islands is a typical case where Cameron not only and Maggie Thatcher went to war with Argentina. Since then, he's been talking about Falkland oil and gas and all these conglomerates involved in finding this precious oil down there, and in conjunction with American joint ventures, which are all involved across the board in oil and gas anyway, with Honeywells, you know, etc., etc. Then you can see that what we've got now is you and I and our friends have created a fictitious company with a fictitious mine site or oil claim offshore. We're now going to produce a wonderful video of what it looks like, taking clips from somebody else's video or photographing another mine site that is operational and active and real. Or we do a PowerPoint demonstration to the potential investors. We all group together, we brainwash each other as to how good our project is, and then off we go. Amsterdam, London, Washington, and we're doing the hard sell. We wine and dine our potential investors, more wine than dine, because then they're more submissive in parting with their money. And so we've now, oil, gas and mining is big money. You're talking about billions for a mine, an offshore gas field development. So we're looking for millions, billions of dollars for a phased project, quote, on a project that's fictitious. And they believe us. We give them the yield per ton or how much oil and gas reserves are offshore or onshore. And we all meet up back in London or wherever, and we got our 6 billion from the investors. We then enter on a program for the next 5 years of gross deception by saying We drilled the first hole in the permit area, and the results are looking good. And then we drilled a second hole, maybe in some time later, and it's even better than expected. But now the gas field, or the oil field, or the mining area is now much bigger than we thought. So we may have to have a phased project and, quote, raise more capital from our investors. And so you play along till about the middle of your third year by saying, oh boy, we ought to be turning over X amount of ore, iron ore, whatever, by the year so-and-so. But we're carrying on with our exploration. The results are extremely pleasing. Then we come to the end of the third year or the beginning of the fourth year, and we come out with some bullshit story saying our mine site in the Democratic Republic of Congo have two major issues. One, we've had very inclement weather, extreme downpours of rain, which have flooded the mine shaft or the pit, and the militia, of course, in problems for it. At the moment, we've had to put things on hold. But we will keep you informed, and we hope to start again. Then towards the end of the fourth year, you start telling them that the trouble in DRC is still pretty bad. The weather is very difficult to deal with. We're forever pumping out the shafts, or we can't drill because. And then between the fourth and fifth year, you give them the bad news, and you tell them that with the price of oil or the price of gold or iron ore, it's no longer commercially viable. The risk factor is mind-boggling, so we're pulling out.
Yep.
What the public don't know, everybody else knows except the investors, is that right from day one, that $6 billion you've raised has already gone. It's offshore, and it's filtered into buying other bullshit mine sites and oil fields, and it goes on and on. It's like the mine company we've created, or oil company, is like an octopus, just like the mafia, and the tentacles have gone around the world and hidden forever. You couldn't trace it even if you tried. And when you look at their headquarters, they'll show you this, that our head office is in London, in Pall Mall or whatever, and there's an office in any other country, it doesn't matter. When you pull the place up, you'll realise that it's either a P.O. box or it's a crappy old building, and it's that is what we call in the business a boiler room. Now, this is where so the money's gone, there's no investigation, there's no tax paid on that income, because you've now got $6 billion, which you've reinvested, but the tax officer can't touch it because you've reinvested it offshore, but that reinvestment has gone into somebody's pocket, or some political party, or into the New World Order big fund, the piggy bank.
They were doing this in Kazakhstan, weren't they, with the oil?
Everywhere, all over. I get briefs because, I don't burn my bridges. I keep friends with my enemies. And I get briefs on, they think I'm an investor. Possibly, I don't know. I couldn't even afford a suitcase. But anyway, or a change of underwear. So the money that's been acquired has now been siphoned off, and you've just got to tow them along. Even halfway through, you might get more money out of them, which is good for the piggy bank. The money's gone, there's no tax been paid on it, and the projects don't exist. Add to that the central government or state governments and special politicians of all parties say, hey, we've got a wonderful project going off in the Pilbara in northwest Australia that's going to bring incredible amount of work and prosperity to the northwest. And they start providing public sector funds now at state level, promoting it politically, that this is good for the country, etc., etc. So now we're talking about taxpayers' money. Eventually it all fizzles out, and that incredible wealth has left the country with no tax being paid on any of it, and is siphoned out. Now, where I'm coming from is, and I'll say this categorically, There is no deficit in America.
Oh.
There is no deficit in UK or Australia, wherever, because the country, the crooked politicians, whether they be blind or implicated in that shonky business, have allowed vast sums of money to leave the country and the tax with it, therefore robbing we the people of an income called tax, which is illegal anyway, by the way, you know that. So this incredible wealth, I'll give you an example, and anybody can pull this up. There's an address in Golders Green, which is the, how do we say this, Thomas? Which is the Jewish sector, correct?
Yes, it is.
But, yeah, it's the Jewish sector of London, and if you've been where I've been, believe me, you do feel very uncomfortable because you can see people watching you. So my friend Gordon, we went back in time in our brain to use codes like you do in the military, like we're at the DZ, the drop zone, and different codes like that. We would never leave our phone on, which, if any of you activists out there know this, or people that deal with sensitive truth information, be aware that don't leave your phone on, because that's a sat-nav. And so if you leave your phone on, they know where you are. So we would disconnect our phones. We would have a schedule. We would never travel together. If one went on the train, one would drive, or one would go on the bus, and the other one would drive or go on the train. We would have flexibility in rendezvousing at the DZ, and then have a coffee before we went into court or whatever. Oh boy. So let's come back on track again. Imagine a court case of incredible magnitude involving the theft of money, commercial and at government level, of being allowed to be siphoned off, where many politicians are blind directors or non-executive directors, including prime ministers, including presidents, or their children with a trust fund are involved in some project which this aiding and abetting is going to help. Imagine a court case that can prove trillions of dollars being siphoned out of all the countries we're talking about. Canada in particular is a good hornet's nest. America, South Africa and Australia is a prime one. So I get briefs in saying, because they think I'm an investor, hey Peter, we've got these are the 4 recommendations for investors this month. And they give a list of the oil companies or the mining companies for lithium or crude oil or gold or platinum, whatever. And they're all fake, Thomas.
Absolutely.
Now, if one boiler room, we'll come back to 788, 790 Finchley Road in Golders Green. This was allegedly a very large corporate building housing oil companies, mining companies, exporting British trucks to Africa, whatever. Now think about this. This very old, exquisite-looking building from the outside had on its ground floor one reception area with a couple of little offices. The screens on the front were appallingly dirty. The building obviously needed paint urgently. It was flaking off. And there was handwritten messages on the door, like we're not open yet or whatever. And if you can imagine a building that is supposed to be the headquarters, the flagship of an oil company or mining company, and then imagine that each of those companies, which is non-existent, has got a pile of politicians, and the banks are all involved in giving risk capital. When I say risk, I mean you won't see it again.
Yeah.
for these projects. When you go inside, you ask for a company. The director isn't available today. When you go in, you think, oh, this is a Queen of Gas, say. But it isn't. It's a boiler room of many, many companies. And one girl may have 6 mobile phones. Those 6 mobile phones are 6 corporate fake entities.
Yeah.
Right? Now, 788, 790 involves thousands of companies. One being, I think it's called the British Truck and Gas Company. And when you go on the website, you'll see their wonderful headquarters, which is a glass facade, multi-storey building with beautiful landscape gardens, address of 788 790 Finchley Road. And when you go there, like I did, and take the risks that you do, and go right up and take photographs, people start watching you. You get a cold sweat and your hair stands up on your head. And I remember speaking to Gordon. I says, Gordon, I'm getting a feeling like I shouldn't be here. I really did want to get out of here. He says, well, go. But I did my job. And now this is where good old American Pie comes into it. Think about this, Thomas, and your readers, listeners think about this, the damage that these companies do not only to the economy, but what they do to our military. So as an example, there were 2 British companies in amongst these hundreds and thousands of companies that are like P.O. boxes in this building, and 2 of those British companies, quote, were contracted with, quote, an open-ended contract with the US Department of Defense to supply Jet A1 fuel for the Afghan war via Kazakhstan or wherever it was. Think about the magnitude and the money involved. An open-ended contract, millions and millions of dollars to supply the United States Air Force, Marines, including the British forces and their associated air effort, helicopters and what have you, with jet fuel via this offshore base in neighbouring country, and then offer air support to our heroic troops, which is another thing I'd like to cover later. Now, first of all, the 2 companies were non-existent. It was a paper shell virtual company. Yes. So now we've got a situation where US taxpayers' money via the Department of Defense, remember the Pentagon had a few shortfalls during 9/11 when it was completely, when it was very conveniently hit with a missile, not an aircraft. This money then came from the Department of Defense to the British company to supply the fuel, but there was no company and there was no fuel. Now think about this. So technically, you've got a budget. Every government's got a budget. The military's got a budget, which is a little bit open-ended. You can have so much, but they're still limited for the amount of sorties and training you can do. Everybody knows that. A jet jockey in the Navy will tell you, I may be allowed to do so many deck landings on a carrier, but at a certain time they run it down and somebody else gets to become duty jet jockey for the day, etc., etc. Now think about the implications of this. You've got troops in the field that, quote, require air support. Because if you haven't got air superiority, you can't win the war. You can't even enter in a war without air superiority. So you're protecting your troops, our troops, NATO troops or whatever, and all these so-called partner countries, and now you're depriving them of real delivery of fuel.
Yeah.
That means that in that budget for that operation or exercise or mission is not getting the fuel supply that is allocated to it. So you can't necessarily on a given day get close air support. So your troops or whatever are going to not be able to do the mission. The aircraft can't fly or the helicopters. The same with the supply chain for the spare parts for the thing. It's all in the same business, are all done through third-party, non-existent things. So this then amounts to a possible inquiry in Congress. It doesn't lead to anything. But then, because the British companies, wouldn't you think the British government would interrogate this and find out why? Is this a bogus company, and why is it getting a contract for fuel when it doesn't exist, and there's no fuel anyway, and no inquiry in England? Plus the fact nobody to this day is investigating 788 to 790 Finchley Road, because it generates phenomenal amounts of money for the New World Order.
Yeah.
Multiply that in every city and town in Canada, America, Africa, wherever, and you can see we're talking here about trillions. So my policy is, I then lobby governments, like I did in England, like I'm doing here right now, at my own risk, to say, hey, come on guys, stuff the austerity measures. There's no need for that. There's no need to hand food tickets out to the poor in America. There's no need to take away the walking aid for a crippled person in America, or whatever, so that he lives in absolute poverty and he can't eat, whatever, and say, all you've got to do is, under the Proceeds of Crime Act, do what you're supposed to do with your forensic teams, with your fraud squads, etc., trace these bastards, confiscate their money, their luxury yachts, their private jets, etc., bring the money back into the country, close them down, and suddenly you end up in surplus.
Yep.
That's it. Right. Now, so that's the crux of the court case. But then add to that the Maggie Thatcher, and this is another thing. Can you remember the apartheid thing in South Africa, when
yes.
At one stage no country was allowed to trade with them under the apartheid restrictions? So companies were trading, and Maggie Thatcher, well, first of all, the Israelis and the South African government wanted to get nuclear weapons illegally. Israel couldn't test them because it's only got a very narrow strip of land, so they'd contaminate the whole area. So what better than to get into bed with South Africa, which had copious amounts of space and some offshore islands.
Yeah.
And so they got into bed with the Israelis, and they built, 10 nuclear weapons, very versatile ones that could be carried in conventional bombers. You didn't need a special aircraft for it. The Canberra was one such thing. They were so small, heavy, compact, one could fit in a special harness in the back of a military ambulance. Right? So they test-fired one nuclear weapon under the watchful eyes of UN, who sent a team there to say there was no nuclear weapons and everything was disbanded when it was hyperactive. And I've got pictures of those weapons ready to go. So that when they test-fired one in Prince Edward Island, the American satellites picked it up. And Los Alamos got the information, and the American military, and they said, no, we believe it was some space debris hitting the satellite. I can assure you it was a nuclear explosion they detected. Los Alamos put out a confidential memo about it, etc., and so that left 9 current, ready-to-go operational nuclear weapons. But now we've got apartheid, and they're trying to get the power to swing from the whites to the blacks. So Maggie Thatcher, in her wisdom, and your president and all the other cronies got together and say, we've got to get this nuclear and chemical and biological shit out of there so that it doesn't fall in their hands on a racist basis, right, because they were black. And so it was ordered that the 9 active nukes would be sent to, quote, Chicago, to be decommissioned, and the fission material, by law, has to go back to the country of origin. So they would have decommissioned the weapons, and the fissile part of the bomb would have been sent back in safe form back to South Africa. Okay. At this time, Saddam Hussein is not towing the line, according to the West. Yeah. And so we're looking at a potential war. So Maggie Thatcher, in her wisdom, signed an operational order to purchase, with the approval of the South African government and the Americans, to purchase 3 nuclear weapons illegally under the apartheid UN restrictions and ship them to Oman, True Shalom, as it was called then, and keep them there. And Maggie Thatcher said, if Saddam doesn't toe the line, we'll use them, as they used other nasty weapons.
Yeah.
Now, so 6 of the bombs went to decommissioned in Chicago. There's no evidence of this, by the way, according to everybody else. 3 nuclear weapons were in a place called Palindaba. They were then shipped to the coast to Durban by rail. My whistleblower put in a tender on how to lift these bombs from a truck onto a train and vice versa, so I know it's real. He was a nuclear guy as well. And so these were shipped from Durban to True Shalom, quote, without security.
Wow.
And the reason for that was because they were illegal. You couldn't draw attention to an armed escort to, big trucks coming through with a nuclear weapon on. So they put 1 nuclear weapon in the standard shipping container, 1 in each. So there was 3 nuclear weapons in 3 containers, and took them into a compound that was owned by the arms dealer that sold them. It was a Zionist Jewish Breedenkamp was his name, and there was another guy linked with it as well. They went into an insecure compound, and the arms dealer, the shonky arms dealer, then restole them and sold them on the black market, and the British government couldn't do anything about it because it was all illegal. The money to purchase the weapons was taxpayers' money, but channeled through the Department of Trade and Industry, private sector, and British politicians, including Lord McAlpine, were shareholders in the company that purchased the weapons.
Yep. It
right?
all comes back to full circle.
Yeah. Now, this is where it gets dirty. When they were restolen, they got to move them out of American-friendly territory, i.e. the United Arab Emirates, who are US-friendly, UK-friendly, into an area where they could be sold illegally. And guess what? When Blair and all the others said there was weapons of mass destruction, and that's since been proven that wasn't the case,
yeah.
And they went to Iraq illegally, I'm sorry, Thomas, but they were true.
Yes.
Because
David Kelly exposed that, didn't he? And he paid for his life.
I did the first story on it. I know for a fact, through my whistleblower, that 3 nuclear weapons, those 3 that Maggie acquired, that were restolen by Breedenkamp's shitty group, were then shipped, quote, to Iraq.
Yeah.
And then they were put into 3 military ambulances by road and crossed the border into Syria, and then were dispersed from there. Now, on top of that, you remember the Iraqi, that Saddam Hussein, this is so complex, my head's spinning, Thomas. You know that Saddam Hussein was an ally to the West at one stage.
Yes.
Donald Rumsfeld met him on several occasions, kissed his arse and all the rest of it.
Like Bin Laden.
But, exactly. Well, that's another story. I can blow you away with that one. He went to Iraq, like he went to Afghanistan, to get into bed with the Iraqis because they've got an incredible amount of oil and gas.
Yeah.
Still untapped. Right? And he was hoping to get, with his counterpart, what's the other shyster that owned Honeywell?
Cheney,
Dick Cheney, yeah, and the Bushes, of course.
Darth Vader. Yeah.
We're trying to channel all the contracts through those companies. And Saddam Hussein really wasn't towing the line. On top of that, the West, and I mean the West, including NATO, were part and parcel in helping Iraq go to war with Iran. which lasted 1980 to 1988. Okay, they were behind that. The Saddam, during some stage, fell out with the West. Immediately when you don't comply with the contracts, you become the enemy. You become Al-Qaeda bullshit, right? And then they go on the attack. So now Saddam's a bad boy, but we're still playing games with him, so we'll support him. And then suddenly, as time progresses, Saddam gassed people up in the north, in Kurdistan.
Kurdish people, yeah.
Now, unknown to you, but I frequented that area many times as a civilian. So I know the story up there. He also poisoned some people in the marshes, and then he went to war with Iran for no reason whatsoever. There was no legitimate reason, with the full support of the West. They not only supported it, they wanted him to elongate it as long as possible, and in the hope that they would win. Yeah. Because what was hurting America was they couldn't access Iran for, again, lucrative oil and gas contracts. Yeah. So it was hurting, the same as with Gaddafi. You start to learn the truth. It's called geopolitics. And so we've got this scenario now. And then, of course, when they fall out with him, they use the gas attacks as an instrument against Saddam Hussein gasses his own people. Now, I've got the files which prove that everything to do with weapons of mass destruction and chemical and biological warfare additives and how to make them, including putting the laboratories are in, were supplied from the West and our allies, including Japan. So we provided the material. Britain developed the laboratories for him because we had vast experience with chemical and biological warfare from Rhodesia in Africa, doing the same thing there, poisoning native African water holes with anthrax, as an example. And so we created this monster who became the enemy, and then we took him out quickly. They had to, because if he spilt the beans in international court, wow, look who's implicated. Yep. And then to add insult is that all these wars are about using nuclear weapons or not being allowed to get them. You touched base with this just before I came on air. Why a country is not allowed to do whatever, because it puts them in a bartering position with the West once they've got nuclear weapons. They played the same game they're doing with North Korea and Iran. They also put pressure on Pakistan and India when they went down the same road, but they failed. And so now Pakistan and India are nuclear and have got a tool to barter with. But where I'm coming from is, we'll come to more recent times. Am I burbling on too much here?
No, you carry on.
It's hard to talk with 15 and 20 years in your head in an hour and a half. So please understand, I get into a system where it all clicks in and I can talk about it.
Well, we can carry on a bit longer because this platform allows for 4 hours. So you just let me know when you want to finish. So we're okay.
Okay. Now, come back now and look at the how hypocritical our various governments are, our presidents and prime ministers. So it doesn't matter whether it's Obama, whether it was Bush Senior or Bush Junior, or the current Trump. No. We put all of those leaders, and I say this beyond a shadow of doubt, we put them all into a category of belonging to or being puppet to the New World Order. Or Illuminati, with big involvement in the pedophilia side, and what's that other institute we talk about? The Freemasons, etc., etc. Right, this is the bad side. Link that with the richest people in the world who are way above the banks, your Rothschilds, your Rockefellers, who are, quote, Zionist Jews, not genuine, sincere, authentic, Holy Land Jews, if you want to put it that way. All those people don't give a shit about the Jews living in Israel.
No.
They'd drop an atom bomb on them if they could fill their pockets more.
Yeah.
And they're doing it, and I'll come back to that later. So the principle of, first of all, the West, the Illuminati, the New World Order, there's three main themes here. They want to get their hands on the natural resources of whichever country they want to get hold of.
Yeah.
They want to control the markets for those resources. And finally, they want to control the sea lanes, the airways, the pipeline routes for those commodities. Add to that the enormous wealth accumulated from the fake companies, trillions and trillions of dollars, with the billions of dollars coming from those resources and the contracts, lucrative contracts with Honeywells, blah, blah, blah. And the fact that if you go to war, it's good for the economy, for them, because they're in charge of the arms, both the heavy duty stuff and the software for the missiles, etc., etc. Add all that together, and that they control the banking fraternity, that they have the ability to take out a company or country at will, anytime they want to. They just collapse it, like Lehman's and all that thing. They created 2008 collapse, which was a financial tsunami that hasn't finished yet.
No.
And they collapse companies, making them worthless piles of shit, and then they pick through the carcasses of those companies, be it Ford or Boeing or whatever they choose to collapse, buy back what is potentially the most lucrative aspect of those accumulation conglomerates, whatever, and then bury the rest forever. It doesn't matter how many people they put out of work, the more the better. And eventually, it all turns around to Joe Bloggs has lost his income. He's past that borderline where he's now mature and overqualified. So he loses his income. It becomes very unstable. He's now wanting to lean on the charity of the government, which doesn't exist. And then, to add insult to injury, they do a foreclosure on his house, which is also an illegal activity, which I could also explain later. You can't take a house, the bank cannot take a house off an individual. And there's loopholes there, which maybe I'll have time to explain. So put all this together, and you can see their incredible wealth, and now they control the system. So, for instance, and this is a very difficult subject to talk about, there was no one more dedicated to being there on Remembrance Day for a given cause. I was in the military myself. But by the time I come out, like most vets, what you thought you were doing and why you were doing it, when you've done the course and you come out, you realise it's all lies.
Yeah.
That this is all materialistic greed by the conglomerates. So if you have a war, your war machine clicks into order, you get phenomenal orders. Basically, you blast shit out of a country and then get contracts to rebuild it.
Like Haiti.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Haiti was, intentional.
Yes.
And so there's that side of it, and the rebuilding and infrastructure there. But then, of course, having gone in and blasted shit out of it and got a puppet government in that you've allocated, or should I say the New World Order has allocated, that is user-friendly to the West. Now it's all set for you to go into Libya or wherever and get your contracts back again, and this incredible wealth. Add to that the fact that if the country you're up against you owe money to, what better way of writing off the debt than going to war with them and hope you win?
Yeah.
I.e. China. What is hidden here is this hidden agenda is people don't understand the futility of war, that there's no winners, really. Because, as an example, Iran, they wanted to blast shit out of Iran. Who was the instigator out of all the West? Was not a Western country at all, it was Israel. And it still is Israel,
yeah,
through the Illuminati Zionist mafia. So you've got people in politics there that themselves have a very wonderful history of being in a hit squad or working for Mossad or known corrupt and fraudulent. They're all under investigation. But
like
they never...
the guy in Iran, I call him Ahmadinejad Jacket. He's another Zionist puppet.
Yeah, well, I have to be careful here, and I'll explain why. Where do we go on? So we get this big machine underway, and then we send our soldiers, our what you call pawns, to war. Now you know what Kissinger said about the troops, HSBC and all other shitbags. That what we're doing is we're actually protecting the crop, not annihilating it. So we're putting armed guards around a poppy field that's selling more opium now than they've ever sold, even though we've got occupational forces there. Then we have the other scenario where our presidents and prime ministers saying we're doing a drawback on our forces. The war's over, even though it's not.
Yeah.
We've given the country democracy, Iraq, Afghanistan, which we have not.
No. We've
pulled them out of poverty and given them jobs and down the line of prosperity, which we're not, etc., etc. And now we're getting the drug money moving. And more importantly, and people don't understand this, that when Karzai was in charge of Iran, he was an expat from America. He was nurtured through the oil industry. He was brainwashed by Americans. He was a Western Muslim. And he went back to that country and became president. And he then befriended all the scumbags in Honeywell's and the president, who were all involved in oil, gas and mining, and was doing deals. And the most important thing they wanted, two very important factors in Afghanistan. They wanted to protect the opium crop, not destroy it. And secondly, to put through what is known as the TAPI, T-A-P-I pipeline, which means Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. This was a gas pipeline to feed these vast continents of very poor people with gas that was economically viable to sell. But in return, America was getting billions of dollars revenue from this pipeline.
Yeah, I believe I was told by a top source that the Bushes or the Bush group are getting $1 per barrel, and Putin recently cut that off.
Yeah, but there's more in there. Where I'm coming from is that at this same time that Karzai was in office and the Americans were in bed with Afghanistan before the war, remember?
Okay.
Like before the war with Iraq, they were getting on with the presidents. All we want is oil, gas. We want to take over all the production of oil, getting it out of the ground, mining, whatever, and all our companies, UK companies, European companies, are going to give you the technology, run the oil fields, and you'll just provide the slave labour, whatever. And most of the revenue from those assets will go offshore. So you're killing Afghanistan, you're not helping it.
No.
All they get out of it is what they call transit revenue. They have to pay Afghanistan so much money to allow the product to pass through their country, which they'd even shaft them on as well if they had the opportunity.
Yeah.
So this is all about drugs and the TAPI pipeline. And just to add some more to that, when the war was on with Russia, and Russia was deeply embedded in there, and remember this is a very big army that they put in there with pretty good technology, and they couldn't defeat. They lost, basically. Yeah. And then it went quiet for a little while, but the sons and daughters of those Afghan fighters became who?
Yeah, okay, the Taliban.
Taliban, exactly. The Taliban are the children of the people that fought in the Russian war. Yeah. Now, the Taliban they weren't terrorists, really. I always reword this. They're freedom fighters.
Yeah.
Because people are running shit over their country against sovereignty and all the rest of it to acquire their wealth, strip it, and then leave them in absolute poverty and control them. So they were freedom fighters. But Taliban also, because of their power within Afghanistan and Pakistan, they needed to get them round the table to agree to the Tapi pipeline and offer them a lucrative deal. And I've got pictures of this. This is fact. Taliban head tribe leaders were on an all-expenses week jolly to Dallas in Texas. I've got pictures of them in situ in America with the likes of the shitheads in Honeywells and all the rest, or Union Oil and Gas, whatever they were called, Bush organisations. And the idea was to sign this Tapi contract away and other ongoing projects, including the vast copper fields. A lot of people don't know, but Kabul and all that area to the south and to the east is massive copper fields and all the other resources. The Taliban were just about to leave Dallas with what they thought was a lucrative deal, but then they realised that the corporate sector and the military sector that were involved in America was shortchanging them. Instead of, the law is if you do a joint venture with a country, they must have 51% to have control of the project.
Yeah.
But they were shortchanging them way below that. So the Taliban went away with their tails between their legs back to Afghanistan and said no deal. The minute they did that, like Saddam Hussein, they became the enemy.
Taliban shut the poppy fields down, didn't they? For
Yes,
12 months. And
now you can see.
Plummeted.
So now you can see why America and the West just needed to get into Iraq to recover that and hopefully go into Afghanistan, blah, blah, blah. Now, with those two battlefields and they're still hyperactive, we then get our presidents and prime ministers saying, we're pulling the boys back, right? We will just leave a skeleton force there of special forces and high-tech military men to train them.
Yeah.
That is an absolute lie. Because I was in Kurdistan and the whole of the Middle East, and I can tell you that so-called US Army, US Air Force, whatever you want to call them, were replaced with, quote, private sector security companies like Blackwater, blah, blah, blah.
Prince.
Now, I've met these guys, and I've had coffees with them, and you want to see what they've got. They've got more equipment and a better network than the military themselves.
Yeah.
So we haven't pulled out of Iraq, and we haven't pulled out of Afghanistan. But when they die, you don't hear about it.
No.
Okay? So that's it in a nutshell. Now, I'm going to come back to, if you don't toe the line, if you don't say yes, you become the enemy. Yeah. So now we'll come back to what they did to Libya. Gaddafi raised his country to a very high level. Believe it or not, he was a wonderful man. Yes. He was a bit of fraud there, but he raised that country. He gave everybody a home. He promised them that my father and myself and my family will never go into a house until you're all in a house. And so he lived in a tent. And everyone could get a loan, and all the wealth of the country, some of it was going offshore, so he decided he wanted to nationalise the French oil companies, Total, whatever it was called, the Americans and the Brits, because, at one stage Blair and the US president were kissing his arse. Yeah. But now he's doing a backflip on them. I want to make my country prosper more, and all the revenue that comes from this is going to stay within the country. Then they took him out.
Absolutely.
Now, okay, so that's that. So we've now got a clear picture of what's going on. Syria's all about what do they want to do. If you know anything about the oil and gas industry, and I certainly know a lot about it, and have patrolled the seas and been there with the tankers and on shore, that the main feeder pipeline for crude oil is from the Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz into the Arabian Sea and then off to America or off to the Far East. That is your main supply. Hence the pirates protection system, which is also bullshit that America and the West put in. So, be careful here. It's still spinning around, Tommy.
The pirates rescuing or saving the other pirates.
So, yeah, that's right. But what I'm trying to say is they want Syria for a specific reason. If you can cut down that chain of going up the Persian Gulf, which they don't like to be called Persian Gulf because Persia is Iran, they would rather just call it the Gulf. But I'm sorry, folks, it will always be the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, whatever. So they want to cancel that very expensive detour to get the fuel by shipping this vast amount of energy, oil and gas from Iraq through to the northern ports of Syria. And immediately you've cut out the need to go into the Gulf at all. Now, if you also take out Iran, or if you make friends with Iran and get your hands on that untapped resource, which is bigger than Iraq, you're talking about vast sums, infinite sums of oil and gas able to transit from, say, the Tehran area, straight across in Iraq, either separate or joint pipelines, oil and gas, through to Syria, into the Mediterranean. Now the whole of Europe can tap into it, directly into it with a pipeline, and America can tap into it by only having to go to the the eastern Mediterranean coastline to pick up with their crude oil and gas.
Yeah, and this is why, also why Turkey plays a key role.
Absolutely. Now, let's broaden this now and say they always, for you to be able to carry out an action, you've got to create an incident. Now, we know about Vietnam being a false flag with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We know what the Israelis did with the spy ship off the coast there. Hit out of it, with American approval. Right? Etc., etc. No one knew anything about it, but unfortunately for them, some people survived to tell the true story. Add to that, they've got to have a reason. So 9/11 came on the scene, which was a total false flag. In London, 7/7, false flag. The Boston Marathon, false flag. You name it, they're Madrid. All there. Madrid, the school thing, what was it called? Sandy Hook?
Sandy Hook,
all that. And you say, well, you know, Peter's talking bullshit.
Nope.
When you have the ability to not only work in intelligence and what's the other word, reconnaissance, you have to pay attention to detail. You learn to speed read. You not only work how to do codes and ciphers and type at a very fast rate of knots, doing Morse code and all the rest of it, but more importantly, you're left to look at a scenario, remember it, and then either document it or sketch it in fine detail. So you've got to be pretty good in that area. So what I do is, when a false flag event, or I assume it's a false flag because of the nature of it, you've got to be quick off the mark and start documenting, copying, written form, what the newspapers are saying around the world, and more importantly, freeze framing every video that comes out. That's a lot of time consuming work and energy, but you end up with the truth coming out that, boy, was that a classic false flag. Like the Melbourne incident in the Mall, like the Lynn Cafe in Sydney. You know, when you freeze frame it, the truth comes out and you put all the rest together. The same as taking Bin Laden out when they didn't. He was already dead, etc., etc. And so you create a situation now where the intel people, with the Zionists, with the New World Order, control a country. They control the presidents and every candidate, doesn't matter which party, or which bitch, i.e. Hillary Clinton, you control them. And so you create an incident to spread Islamophobia, whatever you want to call it, hysteria throughout a given country. So that at a given time when you want to take an action against this so-called aggression that isn't aggression at all, you've got the people on your side who now start to think anti-Islam. Now, I will say to your audience, as I do on stage or anywhere else, believe me, from my heart, I can tell you that we really do need to offer a sincere apology to many Islamic people and countries for the deplorable way we've created a war and written off millions of people and contaminated their country.
I did a show in November 2015 called The Faction Show, and it detailed the split factions of the Illuminati, with the Jesuits, secret societies, the Nazis, the Zionists, and the Asian faction. And one of the things I covered was the world wars, or the 3 world wars that was prophesied, i.e. plans, by Albert Pike back in 1888. And the 3rd World War was Muslims versus the Christians. Go figure.
Yeah.
You know, they first started. Their first attempt was 1990 at the World War III, and they failed 4 or 5 times since.
But of course, they go back further than that, Thomas. You know that the New World Order started off with the Napoleonic Wars, and the Battle of Waterloo, etc., etc.
Yeah,
anyway, so to create an action, to carry out an action or a war, you've got to have an incident. So you keep putting in these false flags to generate, through the Zionist-controlled media, that this is what happened in Paris today. Of course, France does have a lot of active false flags because their president is a Zionist Jew.
Absolutely.
As was the previous one, Sarkozy.
Yeah.
Etc. So you start to get the picture. What you've got now is you've got the New World Order, which I can also break down because some people consider I'm an expert on it. I don't think I am. I just learn about it. That there's 2 sides to the Illuminati or the New World Order. There's the German side and the Jewish side.
Yeah.
There's like the Fourth Reich,
like
the Third Reich, is in existence.
Yeah, it's in America.
Exactly. And George Bush Sr., his father, George Bush, and George Bush Jr. are in actual fact German, and with direct links into the Nazi Party, for which they've been filmed as young children, with the likes of Joseph Mengele, you know, Dr. Death himself, and some of the more important leaders. Then you've got Operation Paperclip, when all those shysters that should have been put into Nuremberg for evil tortures and what have you, or the high-tech side of Germany, which has relations out of this world, you know where I'm coming from.
Yes.
That technology and that evil doing came to America with false IDs, new names. They didn't have passports, and so the Schwarfs became the Bushes. The same as Trump origin goes back to the same as the royal family go back to Germany. So you've got a conflict now between the various infrastructures of the New World Order in-house fighting to get supremacy of world. Now we come back to why do they allegedly go to war because a leader is not Western user friendly, so we have to get rid of him. And secondly, we want to get our hands on their resources, and we can't because he doesn't like us. So we've got to create an incident, a false flag event, like Gulf of Tonkin, and change the government. At the same time, we've got to put in our various special forces and Secret Service, CIA, Mossad, German DVD, MI5, MI6 operatives in the country to disrupt, divide and conquer. Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. So I've got pictures of special forces in all these countries caught red-handed. You know, like, we don't have boots on the ground? Bullshit. You've got a bloody army on the ground.
Yeah.
Whether it be secret security forces, private sector, or government. And they're good. I mean, you've got to hand it to them. They do what they're told. They're brave people. They represent their country. But they don't know what they're doing, like most of our forces. And they come back contaminated and shell-shocked or whatever, to be left in total misery with no support whatsoever. Over 1 million vets from the Gulf alone, almost, many of them suicidal, many of them contaminated for life. So come back to the reason. We create an incident, like with Saddam Hussein. We give him his chemicals, biological weapons, and nuclear technology. Ship it to them, and then he kills whatever. And then, because we've now fallen out with him, we've got to get rid of this exterminator. Yeah. So they did the same with Gaddafi. They said he was killing his own people, which is bullshit. And then now Syria. Yeah. Now, with Syria, you create, for the second time, a false flag gas attack. Now, it doesn't matter where the gas came from, but it certainly didn't come from his own forces. It could have been taking out a target that happened to contain chemical weapons or whatever, or it was some shitheads that are there with special forces that set it off intentionally to create a problem. Now, when I met these people, the likes of these people in Iraq, they were telling me, as did the same with the people I met in Northern Ireland, that they went against the rules of engagement. You know, the military have a very strong rules of engagement. It's like how to kill somebody with pride. You know, you don't shoot until shot at and all this sort of thing. You know, you try and diplomacy. So there is a rules of engagement which all these forces are forced to violate, which deeply upsets them. So I listened to these people telling me about where they plant a bomb in Northern Ireland at IRA funeral, killing all these mourners that's lost a dear one, and all the women and children that were there, as an example. Yeah. And they're deeply disturbed by it.
Yeah.
And the same in Iraq. So now we come back to Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, ISIS, whatever. All those entities, so-called terrorists, are not terrorists really. They are Western intelligence hired militia, directly hired and organized by the certain sectors of the Pentagon, but in particular by the CIA, who also control the zones, the drones. Yeah. The English MI5, MI6, German DVD, and the French equivalent. Basically what they call the G7, which is also NATO, create a disrupt and divide policy. And they go into, and I've spoken to the people that have done it, special forces, that have gone into a market in Baghdad and set off a bomb for maximum effect. And then blamed it on ISIL, whatever. But ISIL is themselves.
Yeah.
Like
mainly Langley.
Yeah, and Taliban, of course, is the same. So you control them, you fund them, you train them, they arm you, and then at some stage, some of them turn on you because they see the human side that we're destroying our own country. And then again, then blah, blah, blah. So Al-Qaeda and what's his name, Bin Laden. Bin Laden worked for the CIA.
Yes.
He met with the CIA, many. Now, this is where the grand lie comes out, before we go back to WMDs and weapons, that Bin Laden died, I think it was the 14th of December 2001, just after 9/11. He had nothing at all to do with 9/11. No. Now, I'm an ex-paramedic. If you know anything about why people become sick, when you're extremely tall, 6'6" or whatever, you're almost a giant, your body and its infrastructure is racing away at a phenomenal pace, and so you get an oversized heart, all your tissues are all out of gel, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, and you're abnormally growing too fast, and your body can't deal with this massive structure that it's got. And in Bin Laden's case, he suffered from kidney disease in a very bad way, and all the other things attributed to people that are abnormally large. And so he frequently got to a stage of near death, a very sick man that needed dialysis machines. For a guy in northern Pakistan, wherever he was very difficult for him to get that, plus the fact he saw the dirty side of the CIA eventually and went against them. So they went after him. Now, the thing is, they didn't have to go after him because he wasn't around anymore. He died in the military hospital in Rawalpindi in December 2001. And suddenly out of the blue they kept him alive because he was the main enemy. And isn't it so convenient that suddenly they come up with a story and say we've just taken out the main leader of ISIL. But then ISIL continues, and there's a Mustafa comes into the being, and that's your second enemy, and it just goes on. A permanent Islamophobic war is what it all comes down to, when the enemy is within. We are the axis of evil because we've created them, we feed them, we arm them, we train them. And some of them do what we told them to do, and others, like Bin Laden, at the last minute turns around. Anyway, Bin Laden became so sick, they flew him in a private jet to Dubai. They put him in a military section of a hospital in an exquisite area that had its own separate lift access, and the CIA visited him when he was on the machines in Dubai. He then went back as a very sick man, and unfortunately they couldn't offer him the same support back in the primitive area where he was living. And so he died as a minimum of kidney failure and all the other problems associated with people that are abnormally tall or whatever. And so when they did this miraculous trip that they talked about, the Navy SEALs, again, you analyse this false flag event and you realise that a group of helicopters set out from Bagram in Afghanistan on a long flight to northern Pakistan. The question is, of course, how do you get through without being spotted? So that, again, think about it. The so-called compound was very close to a military base, which would have had its own mechanism for being against anybody coming in. And then, in the middle of the night, a group of helicopters come in and they rope down. One of them crashed in the compound, and I've got pictures of that with this super-duper high-tech, undetectable helicopter, which was absolute bullshit. And when you freeze frame it, you see people in the compound running around. They're not fighting at all or defending Bin Laden. Bin Laden ain't there.
No.
It's just a false flag compound.
A stage show.
And then you say to yourself, okay, well, now they've lost a helicopter, so they've got surplus Navy SEALs. Where are you going to cram them in? And how do you get up the rope back into the helicopter? Because there's very few places they could land there. Of course, the compound, they have to land in the adjacent fields. And on top of that, you've got to get Bin Laden's body out. And so then you've got that long flight back to Bagram, and then an extended flight out to allegedly a carrier to bury him at sea.
Yeah, which you do.
And then you got this ridiculous congressman that comes out full of authority and bullshit that says he was there for the sea burial. Well, excuse me, I've done quite a few sea burials myself, and the victim is shrouded completely. You can't see the person, and believe it or not, they do sink. But for some miracle, this congressman saw Bin Laden's face and identified him before he went in the water, etc., etc. And then you look at the logistics and the range of the helicopters, and you know that it was all bullshit. And isn't it convenient that squad of Navy SEALs, their helicopter later crashed when they were all killed?
Yes, because dead people don't talk.
Right. One more thing while we're on that topic. I forget the year, maybe 2010, 11. You remember when Hillary Clinton went very sick, and she was out the public domain it was over Christmas, I think it was some 6 weeks.
Is that when she allegedly got shot at in Baghdad?
Well, she said that, but she wasn't shot at anyway. And then she said that she'd got some deep vein thrombosis or something like that, a clot or whatever. Now, this is fact. Around the same time, a US Navy SEAL commander, Commander Price, I think I can recall, but I've got the story, allegedly committed suicide in Afghanistan. Listen to this carefully, folks. Price and a couple of other Navy SEALs went over to Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf, to meet up with a committee of people, including Hillary Clinton, prior to Christmas that year. Yeah. They then flight planned up to Iraq with a special communications aircraft called a Heron, twin-engine turboprop. We call it a King Air in civil languages. And I'm an aviation expert, by the way, so I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. They flight planned to go to Iraq, but very conveniently diverted into southern Iran, Arvez airfield, to meet up in a very under-the-table meeting with the Iranian president to discuss a way out. Because you know yourself, when leaders get into conflict and get put into a box, you always diplomatically let them bow out with grace without losing credibility. Yeah. And the Americans knew they were on the wrong footing with Iran, so I think they were trying to calm the storm and do a very secretive meeting. Anyway, the plane went in, as frequently happens in those neck of the woods and in Iraq. You can have dust storms, crosswinds, very unstable air, and the aircraft came into land and crashed. The US Navy SEAL commander was killed. Others we don't know. Who else was injured? But Hillary herself was injured very badly, with head injuries, with that crash. And she was hospitalized, and they secretly got her back to the Middle East by Bahrain, and then back to wherever. At that stage, Obama was looking at a replacement for her, which was Kerry, because he didn't think she'd pull through. And she was badly injured. And if you've noticed since that event that she's very, very unstable. She can very easily fall over, and she's always coughing, and she has major issues and may even have clots still. I don't know. Anyway, when she went back to work, they bought her a present. You know what the present was? A crash helmet. And they said to her, it was a baseball crash helmet, but they said, next time you go flying, next time you go on a trip, wear this. So there you go. That's another authentic story, which was monitored by the Russian secret services and many others. And then, to add insult to injury, they flew Price's dead body back to Afghanistan and made out that this brilliant patriot who gave his life for his country, they said committed suicide. So, now we come back to why the wars happen. Big subject today. They go in and create an incident, in this case gas or whatever, in Syria, get their own controlled media to put out the story of women and children, and there's two sides to that as well. I think you know one of them. Yes. that it was a false flag and many children were killed, but unknown to others, those children were allegedly being given heart injections to revive them or to combat the poison from the toxic gas or whatever, when in actual fact the syringes were pushed into the heart and the contents were not ejected into the body or injected. And not only that, they're very crudely moving the needle around while it was in the heart. And whatever happened, those children would have died anyway, if they were survivable.
Yeah, that's so when they go into the organ harvesting. 18,000 Syrian kids.
Yeah, that's right, because it looks like they portray that the real ambulance men, white hats and doctors, when in actual fact they just hired people to play the actor's role. Now we've wound up the whole of the West through the media here in Australia over you, and you're all for punishing Assad and his government for carrying out this weapons attack when he didn't do it.
No.
It doesn't matter who did it. He didn't do it and his government didn't do it, but you're portraying that he did. So now you fire 59 cruise missiles at that base, allegedly where it came from, how they knew where it came from, what it was, I don't understand. But anyway, retaliatory action. Now, I say, what gives we in the West, in particular UK and America, the right to police the world?
Exactly.
That's point one. Secondly, if we're going to carry out an action which is covered up as a false flag, then why would you yourself use weapons of mass destruction and or chemical and biological weapons to wipe the alleged enemy out? And so we've got a situation where, for instance, when they think about this, folks, this is so meaningful. When shock and awe in Iraq took place, think about this and then connect it with Syria, we fired cruise missile after cruise missile after cruise missile into a fireworks display of Baghdad. It was called Shock and Awe. What a lovely title.
Yeah.
Now, what you don't know, the public don't know, and the media ain't going to tell you, and your governments and shysters, is that that created one massive contamination cloud. Because all those weapons used in Iraq and Afghanistan, and to this day in all fields, most contain depleted uranium.
Yeah.
For two purposes. One is that it's got the added advantage of being able to pierce through, punch through armour and concrete, because it's the best you can get. But, quote, it's a nuclear waste from the atomic industry, so why wouldn't they want to use it on weapons? What better way to get rid of your uranium garbage than to put it in a weapon and spread it somewhere else? On top of that, as was proven during the 1940s in Los Alamos, when the nuclear fraternity came into being, they found that when they were doing the tests, that some of the tests created a radioactive gaseous cloud.
Yeah.
And they said, what a wonderful weapon. We can spread this over a given area. It doesn't have to be target specific. You can take out a tank, but you'll also contaminate the entire area and countries beyond. And therefore it is a weapon of mass destruction. It is a chemical, biological weapon, whatever. So now you blast shit out of Baghdad and you create this massive, massive cloud that when the bombs, armour-piercing bunker busters go off, they create an inferno in excess of 5,000 degrees, because depleted uranium has a very low burn temperature, about 170 degrees, whatever. So that when an armour-piercing shell goes down the barrel, before it leaves the barrel, it's already burning from the friction.
Yeah.
So when it leaves the barrel, it's like a tracer. But it's not a tracer. It's the depleted uranium burning off. When it hits the target, it creates a thermonuclear type explosion in excess of 5,000 degrees, and then emits this massive big cloud, which is normally very dark, of millions and millions and millions of radioactive nanoparticles that can only be seen through a microscope. There is no breathing apparatus that can even screen it. So now think about it. Our troops are using weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological warfare, whatever, and we're contaminating our own troops as well as the enemy. And then, of course, it takes off into the atmosphere up to 39,000 feet, whatever. And on shock and awe, the contamination plume then tracked up to the Caspian Sea, then went over Siberia, over to Russia, northern extremes of Russia, into the Arctic Circle, went back against the normal flow and went from east to west over Scandinavia, and very conveniently then tracked down over Norway and the North Sea to get pulled into a low pressure system that was centred on Greater London. So, you know what they say? When you do bad, it comes back to haunt you.
Yeah.
Now, I've got real graphs that were obtained under Freedom of Information that show that the atmospheric filters that were at various locations around London to measure radioactivity or whatever went off the scale, Thomas.
Yeah.
Unreported. So immediately, the only time that those radioactive particles come down to Earth, to Mother Earth, is when it rains or snows. And then it goes into the environment, into the groundwater, into the crops. And listen, folks, the half-life of depleted uranium is 4.5 billion years. It cannot be cleaned up. So now you've got mass contamination across the world because it keeps moving on and moving on until it's rained out or snowed out. That then, one of those little microbes gets lodged in your lung. You then become the victim of radioactive poisoning because it's like a hot spot, and you die in 6 months, 6 years, 26 years, whatever. So the theory of going up against a dictator, Saddam Hussein, whatever, and Assad in this case, because he used weapons of mass destruction or chemicals, when you yourselves are using them to take him out. And then you're poisoning the people in Syria and the countries beyond.
Absolutely.
So
then you can clear it out and create the caliphate they want.
Yeah, so really what you're doing is you're progressively doing a very slow mass depopulation, which fits in with Agenda 21 and the new one, which is 2030. Yeah. I think you better come in and say something. Or are there any questions there?
No, I think we've covered it. We're probably going to end the show now. I've been going now for 3 3/4 hours, so we'd love you to come back on again if you have time.
This is a wonderful story to close off with.
Yes.
Some time ago, an RAF Chinook helicopter during the Northern Ireland skirmish with Southern Ireland flew 25 of Britain's best, highest military, intel agents and Northern Ireland police from Belfast Aldergrove Airport to Scotland for a secret meeting. That helicopter crashed, and you can relate to the song, in the Mull of Kintyre.
Yeah.
Right? Now, they blamed the pilot for flying in inclement weather visually and then entered cloud and crashed into the headland of the Mull of Kintyre. It didn't make sense to me because I'd worked with large helicopters, so I reenacted the whole thing myself, and there were that many grey areas, I started to think false flag. Then I started to open up, and whistleblowers started coming in. The first statement that was made in Parliament, and it's recorded, that, ladies and gentlemen, we've lost, heads down, bullshit, keep your eyes closed, 2 minutes silence while you're winking at each other. That aircraft was taken down by the system, by the British government. It doesn't matter which section. It was taken out because on board that helicopter were all the people responsible for ongoing conflict, civil war with Ireland, or peace. So to the British government and to your government, who were very pro Southern Ireland, if you got a problem, remove the problem. The problem was all those senior officers who knew who the perpetrators were, who the true terrorists were, and wanted to round them up and name and shame and put them away, were taken out. Job done. Yeah. So they blamed the crew. All the relatives of the crew then said, hang on, it was the FADEC system of the Chinook that caused the problem, which it wasn't. And eventually they had another inquiry and they said, no, it wasn't, they weren't pilot error, but we don't know what caused the crash. Now, I came in and I provided a file as an aviation expert with the information that had been led to me. And one is, when Parliament said there was only one Chinook, one helicopter flying at that particular time in that area, was a lie, because nearby was another helicopter that also took off, another Chinook, from Aldergrove on a different track that, quote, was a US Navy SEAL one. And you know what they do. Anyway, the helicopter was then spotted going down the valley before it crossed over the sea to go into Scotland, and it was flying erratically as if the skipper was trying to put it down, obviously under duress or whatever, we don't know. Anyway, it tracked out towards the Mull of Kintyre, which was his first point on the computer, on the navigation computer. Meanwhile, there is a US Navy SEALs tracking out on a dogleg route to the same location, but had to leave before in able to be able to catch it up. So you've got two helicopters heading for the one point. Think about this. The plane is loaded. We don't know with whom, because the manifest was destroyed before the inquiry. So there's the first clue. When the helicopter called at the boundary with Ireland and Scotland, the handover point, FIR boundary they call it, he called up Scottish control, which is a military control. They didn't answer him. Remember, this is a VIP Black Ops helicopter, and air traffic control didn't answer him. The Air Force weren't monitoring it, and so a considerable amount of time passed before somebody called him up, and he didn't answer. He didn't answer because he'd crashed into the mountainside. Now, at the same time as this is going on, besides the SEALs being present, there was also a very secret missile test taking place at RAF Machrihanish, which was an American hyper-speed missile. One that when you hear it, it's already two continents away. So there was a lot of secret squirrel stuff going on there. Anyway, it eventually ended up that I put a report in saying, excuse me, but there was a second helicopter. Excuse me, but why wasn't the manifest kept? All paperwork has to be kept after a plane departs. Why did you not answer the aircraft that was being closely monitored because of the contents of the VIPs on board? And secondly, the aircraft didn't crash into cloud, because all the stuff that you've put in is bullshit. And there was a whole fleet of trawlers and the yachtsmen around, and they got a report that they could see the helicopter when it left the Irish coastline, so the weather wasn't that bad, and they could see the sun breaking through and glistening on its cockpit window. Anyway, then when the RAF rescue squad and the police arrived at the scene was overrun with other personnel. And guess what? They all had American accents.
Military.
Could they be Navy SEALs? Who knows? But anyway, there was no survivors, and eventually I got another call, one of many, from whistleblowers, a relative of the lady doctor that did the autopsy. They did not die from multiple injuries associated with the high-speed helicopter impact. They all died of gunshot wounds to the head.
Yeah, like the Polish airline that went down a few years ago, or the government.
Absolutely. So, for your audience, I'm going to curtail this now, because I know it's an awful lot to take in, and I know that you've been under a little bit of duress because people can't take this in. But I just want you, the audience, to understand that the enemy lies within.
Yes.
There is no terrorism. The terrorism is false flags all within. And 9/11, and this is my closing statement, no commercial airliner hit any building in 9/11, and the one that came down in the field did not come down where they said it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I can prove that. You have to challenge me.
Yes.
No commercial airliner hit anything, and the only one we can confirm was that the Pentagon was taken out by a cruise missile.
Yeah.
That's it. Back to
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for giving us your time and knowledge. I would like you to come on again, as I'm sure there's much more we can still talk about. So when your time is, you got some time, just message me and we'll arrange another show.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to say before I sign off?
Well, I've always been accustomed to being put on the spot and having people dial in or ask questions online, which I prefer to do, because to show your authenticity and alleged knowledge base, it's better to have people spring questions on you. You don't know what they're going to ask, you don't know what the topic is, and you give them a sincere answer, and you can back that up with forensic evidence. But again, I say, ask the questions, or investigate yourself and look into it.
Absolutely.
And you'll find what I find. It's not rocket science.
No.
Not at all. And your country's being run by a pile of psychopaths, including your current president. It doesn't matter who gets in, because the New World Order's put whoever's in place in that situation. Absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much, Peter.
And your constitution, this is an insult, but don't take it that way. Your constitution has the same value as a roll of toilet paper.
Yes.
It was written by the New World Order for the New World Order.
Yeah.
And your judiciary and your entire system is controlled by the New World Order, who through the judiciary swear their allegiance to the crown, but not the Queen's crown, the Crown Templar. Temple Bar. And I've been there. My court case is in there. Oh, and by the way, I was a victim. It's been going 7 years, and I was the defendant. We couldn't afford a lawyer, so we were litigants in person. Think about this, taking on the spy and the government and all the other cronies to expose this. It never ever went public to this day. And we've turned it round. We're now the complainants with a counterclaim, and we won. But we can't get our damages, and we can't get our costs back, because the female spy did a runner to Argentina. So there's no justice.
No.
And you can imagine the sacrifice that we've had to make at personal level and financially.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. You have to do what your conscience did do. Okay. That's it.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I'm sure our members haven't had a chance to look at the Facebook page will have enjoyed that. I'm going to decide tomorrow whether we do the Illuminati Part 2 show on Sunday. We'll see how things go with this show. And hopefully we'll be back on Sunday.
Yeah, I can't come on all that quick for obvious reasons. I've got
this is a separate show, Peter. I did an Illuminati show a couple of weeks ago, and it was going to be in 2 parts. And I did the first part, and we were supposed to do the second part last Sunday.
It's a template for your show.
Yep.
Because I'm an expert in that area. The New World Order, there's main bases, the New World Order, Illuminati. The major base is Rome. Yep. But it's not Catholic Rome, it's Jesuit Rome, with the Jesuit general. Right? Because our king in England, during when knights were full of valour and all the rest of the crap, the king signed our country over to Rome. And also in that contract, which was round about the Magna Carta days, 11 whatever, also included all subsequent countries that England occupied, including America, my friends.
Yes.
So the New World Order legally, judiciary runs your country, financially and whatever. So the main centres is Rome. The administrative and financial control of the New World Order is London, in the Temple area, and the Four Inns, which I've been in and worked in relentlessly in my court case. So I've been in the Devil's Den, and the military arm of the New World Order is in Washington,
DC.
And the NATO is the, you talked about this. It's not becoming. It is the New World Order's army.
Yeah. And
UN is their international arm, domestically speaking, belongs to the New World Order, and the UN's HCR and all the rest of it, so that everything, in whatever direction you look at, is controlled by the New World Order, right down to our education.
Yeah.
Okay, enjoy your next show.
Right, thanks for that, Peter. And we'll probably be back on Sunday with the part 2 at around 4:30. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show and a bit of intel that was done before Peter come on, and obviously you've learnt a lot since Peter's come on. Fantastic knowledge base, and hopefully soon we can have him back on. So, if you lead life in love and care, you will prevail. If you lead life in fear and anger, you will fail. Feel free for you to be the person you wish to be, not the person who conforms to what others want them to be. You are a multi-dimensional being operating simultaneously on many levels. You are not here to conform. You are not here to be stifled. You are not here to be enslaved. And you are certainly not here to be abused or to compete with your friends, family or neighbours. You are here to be the best you can be, and do so as the crown of creation. Now go out with the confidence of who and what you are, and excel in yourself, and in doing so inspire others. This has been a Truth, Honour and Integrity special with Peter Eyre. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.